Hi, everybody, and welcome to the second week of Research Methods and Design course. We will continue to cover two chapters together each week. This week introduces chapters 3 and 4 of the Maxfield textbook. Let's start by briefly summarizing chapter 3 here, ethical issues in criminal justice research. In addition to technical and scientific considerations, criminal justice research projects are shaped by ethical considerations. Ethical conduct means conforming to the standards of conduct of a given profession or group. What is ethically right and wrong in research is ultimately a matter of what people agree is right and wrong. Ethical issues in criminal justice can be challenging because questions frequently address illegal behavior. Researchers tend not to be the best judges of whether their own work adequately addresses ethical issues. One fundamental ethical dilemma in all research is the possibility of harm to the people being studied or harm to other people. Criminal justice research has the potential to produce both physical and psychological harm as well as embarrassment. Two, as a general principle, possible harm to subjects may be justified if the potential benefits of the study outweigh the harm. Voluntary participation. Scientists agree that participation in research should, in general, be voluntary. This norm, however, can conflict with the scientific need for generalizability. Most scientists agree that research should not harm subjects unless they willingly and knowingly accept the risk of harm. Anonymity and confidentiality are two ways to protect the privacy of research subjects. A research subject is considered anonymous when the researcher cannot associate a given piece of information with the person. Confidentiality is when a researcher is able to link information with a given person's identity, but essentially promises not to do so publicly. Deceiving subjects is unethical, needs to be justified by compelling scientific or administrative concerns. Researchers should be more familiar than anyone else with the technical shortcomings and failures of the study. Researchers have an obligation to make shortcomings known to readers. Any negative finding should be reported. In social science, as in medical research, it is often as important to know that two things are not related as to know that they are. Science progresses through honesty and openness and is retarded by ego defenses and deception. Legal liability. Two types of ethical problems expose researchers to potential legal liability. One is obstructing justice or being accessory to a crime or committing a crime, and two, knowledge that research subjects have committed illegal acts. Federal law protects researchers from legal action in most circumstances, provided appropriate safeguards are used to protect research data. Somewhere between legal liability and physical danger lies the potential risk to field researchers from law enforcement. Compliance with ethical principles is promoted by professional associations and by regulations issued by the Department of Health and Human Services (HHS). HHS regulations include special provisions for two types of subjects of particular interest to many criminal justice researchers: prisoners and juveniles. Codes of professional ethics can also help determine ethical conduct. Formal codes of conduct describe what is considered ethical and unethical behavior in this profession. Read more about this in pages 67 to 70 of the textbook. Institutional review boards (IRBs) play an important role in ensuring that the rights and interests of human subjects are protected. IRB requirements and/or other regulations are required because researchers are not always the best judges of the potential for their work to harm individuals. Regulations can provide outside judgments, and they can be a source of expert advice on how to resolve ethical dilemmas. Government agencies and non-governmental organizations that conduct research involving human subjects must establish review committees known as institutional review boards. Two general purposes are: board members make judgments about the overall risk to human subjects and whether these risks are acceptable given the expected benefits from actually doing the research. They determine whether the procedures to be used include adequate safeguards regarding the safety, confidentiality, and general welfare of human subjects. Under HHS regulations, virtually all research that uses human subjects in any way, including simply asking people questions, is subject to IRB review. Keep this in mind when you write your final research paper for this course, as well as when you're asked about ethical considerations in the final comprehensive exam. A great way to learn about IRBs is for you to research John Jay College and CUNY's IRB's policies. Informed consent is the agreement to participate in research after being informed about the research goals, procedures, and potential risks. This information is given before asking subjects to participate because it requires subjects to understand the purpose of the research, possible risks and side effects, possible benefits, and the procedures that will be used. The standard procedure addresses the norm of voluntary participation, a basic tenet of research ethics. See page 70 of the textbook for more. Special populations can be groups like juveniles and prisoners, as we said before, who require special protection. Juveniles are treated differently under most aspects of the law and are considered unable to grant informed consent. Consent must be obtained both from parents or guardians and from the juvenile subjects themselves. Special rules apply to prisoners. They may not be exposed to risks that would be considered excessive for non-prison subjects. Undue influence or coercion cannot be used in recruiting prisoner subjects. Informed consent statements to prospective subjects must indicate that a decision not to participate will have no influence on work assignments, privileges, or parole decisions. If an IRB reviews a project involving prisoners, at least one member of the IRB must be either a prisoner or someone specifically designated to represent the interest of prisoners. See page 71 for more information on this. Let's briefly summarize Chapter 4 now, General Issues in Research Design. Science is an enterprise dedicated to finding out, so we'll cover briefly key elements in planning a research study, such as causation, units, and time. We start with a discussion of causation in social science, the foundation of explanatory research. We then examine units of analysis, the what or whom to study. Deciding on units of analysis is an important part of all research, partly because people sometimes inappropriately use data measuring one type of unit to say something about a different type of unit. Explanatory scientific research centers on the notion of cause and effect. Studying causation in social sciences is crucial because it allows for a deeper understanding of how and why social phenomena occur. We learned before that most explanatory social research uses a probabilistic model of causation. That is the reason why it's suggested that you use the word likely. For example, we say that certain factors make criminal behavior more or less likely within groups of people. By identifying causal relationships, researchers can distinguish between mere correlations and true causes, enabling them to develop more effective policies and interventions. Actually, grasping causation helps in evaluating existing research and contributes to more robust theoretical frameworks, ultimately advancing the field and fostering evidence-based practices. Let's talk about resolution of the causality problem. We begin our consideration of causality by examining what criteria must be satisfied before we can infer that one thing causes another. Recall the discussion of ideographic and nomothetic modes of explanation we had before. Joseph Maxwell, 2013, pages 122 to 123, writes that criteria for assessing an ideographic explanation are 1. How credible and believable it is, and 2. Whether alternative explanation or rival hypotheses was seriously considered and found limited in explaining the phenomenon. The first criterion relates to logic as one of the foundations of science. We demand that our explanations make sense, even if the logic is sometimes complex. The second criterion reminds us of Sherlock Holmes's dictum that when all other possibilities have been eliminated, the remaining explanation, however improbable, must be the truth. Regarding nomothetic explanation, or to resolve the causality problem, scientific investigation entails basically three essential steps. The first step involves the demonstration of a relationship covariance between variables. That is, one variable is related, increases or decreases in value in some predictable manner along with increases or decreases in value of the other variable. The second step consists of specifying or indicating the time sequence of the relationship. Which variable is the independent variable x and which is the outcome or dependent variable y. Generally, logic or knowledge of which variable comes first gives one direction of causation. For instance, it would make more sense that the criminality of parents X would precede in time and possibly predict criminality in offspring Y rather than vice versa. The third step is the stage where many studies bog down and where research findings are subject to prolonged debate. It involves the exclusion of rival causal factors or the elimination of other spurious variables that could conceivably explain the original relationships the researcher had claimed. Within the probabilistic model, there are two types of causes. Necessary cause, which represents a condition that must be present for the effect to occur or follow. X is a necessary cause of Y if Y cannot happen without X having happened. For example, being charged is necessary cause to be convicted. Sufficient cause, which represents a condition that if it is present, will pretty much guarantee that the effect will occur. X is a sufficient cause of Y if Y always happens when X happens. For example, pleading guilty is sufficient cause to being convicted. The discovery of a cause that is both necessary and sufficient to produce some result is the most satisfying outcome in research. When scientists consider whether causal statements are true or false, they are concerned with the validity of causal inference. Validity is the approximate truth of an inference. When we say something is valid, we make a judgment about the extent to which relevant evidence supports that inference as being true or correct. Validity threats in causal inference are reasons we might be incorrect in stating that some cause produced some effect. We will learn more about types of validity in the next lecture. However, here we'll talk briefly about four classes of threats to validity correspond to the types of questions researchers ask in trying to establish cause and effect. One is statistical conclusion validity, is whether we can find covariation among two variables. This is the first of three requirements for causal inference. If two variables do not vary together, covariation, there cannot be a causal relationship between them. Two, internal validity is whether observed associations between two or more variables are in fact causal associations or are due to the effects of some other variable. The internal validity of causal statements may be threatened by an inability to control experimental conditions, such as a non-random sample or effects of some third variable. 3. External validity is whether a relationship observed in a specific population at a specific time in a specific place would also be observed in other populations at other times in other places. External validity is concerned with generalizability from a relationship observed in one setting to the same relationship in other settings. Replication enhances external validity. 4. Construct validity is concerned with two things. One, the degree to which a measure relates to other variables as expected within a system of theoretical relationships. And two, how well an observed cause and effect relationship represents the underlying causal process a researcher is interested in. Four classes of threats to validity correspond to the types of questions researchers ask in trying to establish cause and effect. Threats to statistical conclusion validity and internal validity arise from bias. Internal and statistical conclusion validity threats are related to systematic and non-systematic bias, respectively. On the other hand, external and construct validity threats may limit the ability to generalize from an observed relationship, failing to consider the more general cause and effect constructs that operate in an observed cause and effect relationship results in research findings that cannot be generalized to real-world behaviors and conditions. The unit of analysis answers the question who or what is being studied. These are the people or things whose characteristics researchers observe, describe, and explain. The unit of analysis in criminal justice research is often the individual, such as police, defendants, criminals, victims, etc. But it may also be a group, organization, or social artifact. Before you decide to define your unit of analysis as a group in your research paper or any exam, review the question again. because more often than not, the unit of analysis is going to be an individual. It is essential that we be able to identify what our unit of analysis is. Researchers sometimes confuse units of analysis, resulting in ecological fallacy or the individualistic fallacy. Let me give you an example. William Julius Wilson, 1996, page 167, cites the following example of why it's important to think carefully about units and time. Imagine a hospital that has only 13 beds, where 12 beds are occupied by the same person for 1 year. During the same 1 year period, the other bed is occupied by 52 different people, each staying 1 week. At any given time, 92% of beds are occupied by long-term patients, 12 out of 13. But over the entire year, 81% of patients are short-term patients, 52 out of 64. As you can see, if you're studying the occupancy of beds, the unit of analysis will be all beds, all 13 of them. But if you're studying patients, the unit of analysis would be the individual occupying the bed, all 64 of them. Think about the implication if jail cell is substituted for hospital bed. Because time order is a requirement for causal inferences, the time dimension of research requires careful planning. Observations may be made at one time point, or they may be deliberately stretched over a longer period of time. Cross-sectional studies are studies based on observations made at one time. Although such studies are limited by this characteristic, inferences can often be made about processes that occur over time. Longitudinal studies, on the other hand, are those in which observations are made at many times. Such observations may be made of samples drawn from general populations, trend studies, samples drawn from more specific subpopulations, cohort studies, or the same sample of people each time, panel studies. Retrospective studies can sometimes approximate longitudinal studies, but retrospective approaches must be used with care. To summarize, cross-sectional study can be viewed as a snapshot, one image at one point in time. Trend study is like a PowerPoint, a slideshow, a series of snapshots in sequence over time. This allows us to tell how some indicator varies over time. Panel study is like a movie, a film, a motion picture, gives information about individual observations over time. So there are a couple of videos in week 2 materials folder that you must watch to learn more about ethical controversies. For this week, make sure to complete week 2 exam and discussion board on Brightspace by the end of the week. Before you attempt to engage in the discussion post, make sure to read chapters 3 and 4 in the Maxfield textbook to gain the necessary knowledge to ace your assignments. Also make sure to read chapters 1, 5, and 13 in the Prizak-Bruce textbook in order to learn more about how to write the research paper. Have a great week, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you in the forums.